Hello and welcome to Tipsy Tolstoy, Russian literature for the inebriated.
I'm Matt Gerasimovich, PhD student in Russian Lit. This week, being transported back to maybe 2012 with the music that's been coming out recently. New Pierce DeVille album. I'm really thriving. My Warped Tour youth is really coming back to the surface.
Yeah. Did you take? I heard that you're going to take an entire day off to appreciate it. Did you end up doing that?
No, I didn't.
No.
But my girlfriend came downstairs during the morning and she was like, "Oh, you listened to the new album. How do you like it?" And I'm like, "Oh, I already listened to it like 3 times." So I didn't take the full day off, but I did take a morning off to really appreciate it.
Sure. As you should, as it deserves.
Yes, as it deserves. Yes.
Well, I'm Cameron Lalana, and I had a really fun experience last night because I was at the station. I was going over the script for the 11 o'clock show, and I saw a couple of stories I'd been assigned. One of them, 680 freeway closure. I thought, I use that freeway. Good to know. Probably something that's going to happen over the weekend. And I open it up, and it says, "Oh, it's going to be closed from this point to this point at 10 p.m. tonight." Which is, I was reading that about 9 p.m. and I leave work a little after 11. So I said,
Nice.
"Oh, good. I just found out I didn't have to find a new way home," which is really fun to do.
How did it go?
It went fine. I actually knew, luckily, the construction started right after an area I'm already I kind of grew up around, so I knew some back roads.
Didn't have to take the company helicopter, so that's
No.
Mm-hmm.
Which is actually pretty good because the company helicopter is in a different city.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if they'd let you use it after last time.
I don't think they'd. I don't think anyone's left who remembers what happened with that one. So I made sure that kind of a little hush hush would happen there, so it doesn't affect things going forward.
Right. Well, that's the news for you, baby. This is a podcast where me and my good pal Cameron get to unwind from our week with some Russian literature and a drink or two. This morning, not evening, like normal, we're starting book 3 of War and Peace, part 1. And I thought this was a boring part at first. And then I went back and I was doing my notes and I was like, wait a minute. I definitely overlooked a few things here. So it turned out to be okay.
How could you think this is boring? Tolstoy comes out swinging in part 1 of this.
Yeah, no, he does, but it's kind of just a lot of military boy stuff.
Sure, that's true.
It's the part of the book where I'm kind of like, okay, I get it. I get what you're I started writing that in my patron notes document where I'm like, if you haven't gotten what he's on about military here, it might not be any hope for you. Been the same thing for 800 pages.
Well, if there isn't any hope for you, and after investing all this time in reading War and Peace, if you're following along, you probably want to make sure you're getting the most out of what you're going through. So you can get Matt's very helpful notes if you sign up or subscribe to our Patreon. I forget the exact verb for it, but you can head over to patreon.com/tipsytolstoy, where, as Matt mentioned, he posts a reading guide for each episode, and it'll be including quick commentary on the themes and major quotes in this part. And once per month, we'll also be hosting a Patreon-only reading club for each book of War and Peace, of the book. So sign up for that if you want to make sure that you are among the people for whom there is hope.
There's not many of you, but some of you may have hope.
Matt officially going on the offensive against our audience.
Yes. Yes, take that. If you're not interested in Patreon, but you still want to help us out, you can leave us a nice review on Apple Podcasts or sign up for our email list on our website, tipsytolstoy.com.
Right. And Matt, this fine morning, and embarrassingly, that script, which I did edit, I did not accidentally pull over this evening. I did, in fact, write that about 10 minutes before we started recording. So that's about how well this is going. Sure. What are you bringing to the table? Do you have any drinks for this morning?
I do.
Okay.
I'm drinking a little something from Brooklyn Brewery. It's a non-alcoholic Pilsner called Special Effects, and it's got a kind of trippy looking, art on it.
Cool.
I like it. It's pretty good. And it's non-alcoholic, so I can drink it at 11 a.m. I mean, I guess I could be drinking at 11 a.m., but
sure.
That would be Not too helpful today for me. Got a lot of stuff to get done.
You do have a lot of stuff to get done. Well, unlike Matt, for me, it's 9 a.m. So, of course, I would not be drinking hard alcohol. So instead, I have brought, I'm not
Coward.
Schofer Hofer Hefeweizen beer. It's a grapefruit beer, only 2.5%. So it's really not even alcoholic. But I did have oatmeal for breakfast this morning. So technically,
yes, it is alcoholic.
That's like what you give children.
Sure.
That's what I got when I was like 12. I'm kidding. But if children's breakfast cereal commercials are to be believed, this is grapefruit is part of a complete breakfast along with my oatmeal. So really, this is a health thing.
I'll allow it.
So, like Matt mentioned, this is a big military boy part. Sort of. Yes. There's a little more. We're getting into the. I want to say the War of 1812, but the War of 1812 describes so many things. Actually, 1812, good year for wars, bad years to be in war, or even outside or around it. But before we get into talking about it, Matt, is there anything you want to talk about or open up with?
I thought this chapter was really good on the sort of mirrored imagery. I kind of noticed something that set up some later things in the book that I had not noticed before. And I also just want to say this is the funniest part to me, and the whole Pierre numerology stuff that we'll talk about. This is just like... Okay, so I was talking with someone in our Discord, and she was saying about Pierre that he's really irritating her because he's just brainless, wishy-washy, flopping into whatever people tell him to do. And yes, and I kind of defended him, and I was saying, oh, the narrator kind of gives him some interesting things and characteristics. And I think the narrator still does, especially in his relationship with Natasha, but he's really hard to defend then when he gets the whole numerology, he gets into the whole numerology thing. It's less than ideal.
Yeah, less than ideal, but so very funny.
Really funny, yeah.
I was maybe the number one thing I was excited to get into, because there's some other things I wanted to get into. I'm really into literature of war. So having, like, in this part, Nikolai will have an evolving relationship to warfare, especially now that he's in more active warfare. I thought, oh, this is going to be something that I can, really chat about, or we'll be happy to talk about. But then I got to the numerology part, and I was like, oh, no, we got something far better and far funnier to talk about.
Yeah, I think that Tolstoy really gets his reputation in part from him knocking on the church, but this is just as funny. I mean, the sort of new age spiritualist mystic sort of stuff he's anticipating in a pretty funny way.
I wish I could call that new age. Like, that was I've heard equivalent things to this, like very close, like when I was a kid and you'd have like someone leave the TV on and you get into like the weird part of like religious TV would suddenly come on. Like, I'm pretty certain I heard almost exactly this for like roughly 3 successive presidents. So
no, it's good. And we'll get more into it, but
sure,
it's good.
So let's talk about the War of 1812. So kicking off, Tolstoy lays down a theory of history, which, God, I wish if I had the time, I would honestly read a lot of this, because it was maybe as a real theory of applying the practice of doing like history as like a discipline, a little suspect. However, as a literary device, really cool, really good. The short
he would have
version,
hated like modern historians, I feel like.
Yeah. He lays out, he also hates doctors, but to be fair, for the time period he is writing in, they are prescribing like chicken cutlets and going to the sea. So, all right.
I mean, man kind of cured himself just drinking kumis like all day. So I guess if that had happened to me, I would have been like, I don't need this doctor stuff.
Yeah. But so he lays down, I should say, let me just, there's like so many big parts. A lot of it basically covers what we've been talking about a lot of his theory of history as not like an individual person, but as the, innumerable things that happens. So what he says about this, and he introduces the year of 1812. Let me go ahead. This is going to be a little bit of a longer quote, but I think this really sets the scene for this part. On the 12th of June, 1812, the forces of Western Europe crossed the Russian frontier and war began. That is, an event took place opposed to human reason and to human nature. Millions of men perpetrated against one another such innumerable crimes, frauds, treacheries, thefts, forgeries, issues of false money, burglaries, arsons, and murders as in whole centuries are not recorded in the annals of all the law courts of the world, but which those who committed them did not at the time regard as being crimes. So, sets you up for what we're going to be experiencing in terms of
Yeah.
warfare here.
Yeah.
And as he goes on to talk about the causes of the war, he says this: "We can understand what the matter seemed like to contemporaries. It naturally seemed to Napoleon that the war was caused by England's intrigues, as in fact he said in the island of St. Helena. It naturally seemed to members of the English Parliament that the cause of war was Napoleon's ambitions, to the Duke of Oldenburg that the cause of war was the violence done to him, to businessmen that the cause of war was the continental system which was ruining Europe, to the generals and old soldiers that the chief reason for the war was the necessity of giving them employment, to the legitimists of the day that it was the need of reestablishing le bon principe, and to the diplomats of that time that it had all resulted from the fact that an alliance between Russia and Austria in 1809 had not been sufficiently well concealed from Napoleon and the awkward wording of Memorandum Number 178. It is natural that these and countless and infinite quantity of other reasons, the numbers depending on the endless diversity of points of view, presented themselves to men of that day, but to us, to posterity, who view the thing that happened in all its magnitude and perceive its plain and terrible meaning, these causes seem insufficient. To us, it is incomprehensible that millions of Christian men killed and tortured each other, either because Napoleon was ambitious, or Alexander was firm, or because England's policy was astute, or because the Duke of Oldenburg was wronged. We cannot grasp what connection such circumstances have with the actual fact of slaughter and violence. Why? Because the Duke was wronged. Thousands of men from the other side of Europe killed and ruined the people of Smolensk and Moscow and were killed by them. So, like I said, longer one, but I mean, this is Tolstoy reiterating what we've been saying for many episodes now of the tenuous connection between the so-called great man of history and the actual fact of what and also what really happened, as well as who actually carries it out. He goes on to say that, this entire war, no matter Napoleon's ambitions, would have meant nothing if simply the soldiers and the officers felt that they didn't need to fight the war. If simply they just didn't go to war and didn't lay down their lives, none of this would have happened. And in fact, it's, a larger social pressure, and basically says, individual man is not an individual. A man has an individual life, but also has a historical role to play. And it's not, you're not always in control of it, especially the higher up on the ladder you are, the less in control you are of your own life. And the more that the pressures of the world and the so-called smaller people actually press you into doing things is what he outlines in this part.
Yeah, it actually kind of like predates a lot of thinkers on totalitarianism a little bit, and kind of thinking about why people go to war and why do they do bad things that we all know that we shouldn't do, and yet we do. Well, I guess not all of us go to war, but we all do bad things. And so it's just a really interesting question, because I'm also reading Life and Fate for a course right now. And so I actually was looking for this other quote, which I'll talk about a little bit later in Life and Fate, not realizing that I'd actually read it in War and Peace, because it sounded like something Grossman would have said talking about the Soviet Union.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's something interesting about Tolstoy overall is you can see a lot of like kernels of ideas and thought that is like essential or even like foundational in other lines of thinking. Here, origins of like studies of totalitarianism in his book What Is to Be Done, a sort of like non-socialist, non-Marxist work, which you could very easily see someone picking up, and then like you could see the very easy through line of, well, how can a class of owners do nothing and simply earn from people who do work? Like that's a very, you can easily see the lines
Yeah.
to a Marxist thought there. Of course, he doesn't make that step, and I don't think there's any evidence to say that he was even aware of that, but he's getting these kind of kernels of thought that he writes down, which are so foundational or important in other pieces of thought, which he just never really goes as far or engages with as other thinkers would, which I think is
He also
interesting
kind of
that he has
like
that.
dunks on his own theory of like nonviolent resistance, which he kind of comes to advocate for by the end of his life, but then also acknowledges the kind of impossibility of it, I guess. Because he's right. Yeah, if you just refuse to do anything, then nothing will happen. And if you refuse to go to war, there will be no war. But It's not really just that simple.
Right. Yeah. So I'm sure we'll come back to that more, but yeah,
Yeah.
strong opener for this book.
Pretty strong opening. Yeah.
Yeah. When I was reading this, I had sometimes when I'm reading something, I get a sense of like, oh man, this person, this is an author. Not to say that other writers aren't authors, but like this is someone who has a mastery over their form. And I get that, like reading Akhmatova, especially like Requiem, or reading Hunter S. Thompson. There's like those are people who I just get a sense of someone who has control over their craft in a way that specifically connects with me. And this was one of those, and it was just fun reading it too.
Well, that's why Tolstoy gets to be part of the golden age, I guess.
Yeah. So from here, we join Napoleon, who is kind of at the front lines, and he's leaving Dresden, where he has just been entertaining the rest of European nobility and is having good relations with the Prussians and the Russians and other states. The Poles, I think, are there. Polish nobility are there as well. And he leaves and says, "All right, well, time to continue my war making on them." And he's crossing lines. He's entering at this point, enters into Russia, and the devotion to him is so strong that at one point when he goes to goes forward of his troops, a Polish unit, I think it's led by Colonel, sees Napoleon and wants to impress him so much that this river they're about to ford, he says, no, don't worry about setting up a proper way to ford. We're just going to swim across to impress Napoleon. And they do it, and 40 people die. And the colonel, once he's reached the other side, completely drenched, turns around to, go hurrah to Napoleon, and he finds that Napoleon left a long time ago. So, although the colonel was later enrolled in the Legion of Honor for something that Napoleon presumably was told about and said, okay, sure. And at this exact same time, the Tsar Alexander is trying to figure out what do we do, and he's meeting with his generals and other advisors and aides de camp, and nothing's getting done until someone says, I know, let's resolve this tension by having a ball to not worry about it for a little bit. And so they put together a ball which has many of our favorite characters there. Boris Drubetskoy, now very rich because of his marriage. He's there with Helena. He and she kind of had this sort of intimacy formerly. Now they're spent time together at the ball, but Boris is like, he's just got laser eyes for the Tsar the whole time. He's like dancing with her, but no matter what's going on, he's just eye to the emperor. he knows what to pay attention to, and that's ways to advance. And during this ball, the Tsar realizes that Napoleon, or finds out that Napoleon has entered Imperial Russian territory, which Boris overhears. And after the Tsar specifically says, do not tell anyone about this, Boris immediately scampers off to go tell some nobles who he can get some standing with by telling them this information. So from there, we kind of enter this scene, or this extended a couple of parts or chapters where the Tsar says, we need to respond. He writes a letter, and he dispatches one of his close advisors, Balashov, to go deliver that to Napoleon. And Balashov encounters endless resistance. He assumes because he's being sent by the Tsar, it's going to be super easy. But he's even being detained by any given general or any given colonel or officer sees him. They keep stopping him and delaying him for days. And even one, our old friend, General Murat, back from 1806, 1807, who was the one who very nearly crushed Kutuzov's, I think it was the force Kutuzov was leaving, pulls him aside, has a really friendly conversation with him. Even the Tolstoy talks of his tone as one of a servant speaking to the servant of another master whose two masters are feuding, but wants to make clear that he's got no beef with that servant. So he's very friendly and a little maudlin before, days after Balashov is dispatched, he finally gets to Napoleon. And after being brought to Napoleon, he finds that he is in the exact same house that Tsar Alexander dispatched him from, because in that amount of time, the French army has taken so much land. So from there, he delivers the letter to Napoleon, and they discuss and have an evening together. And Napoleon goes between being very pleasant and even kind of like really engaged with Balashov to ranting at him about how he's been forced to invade. And the implication that he started the war is very offensive to him, because obviously Russia started this war by allying with England in such a way that would obviously create treachery, creating some unfortunate modern political parallels for that justification for invasion. So eventually Balashov gets to go home after this kind of uneven, this character Napoleon who's mercurial, sometimes friendly, sometimes ranting for minutes or hours at a time, in such a way that Tolstoy says it's really the kind of talk you talk when you're trying to convince yourself of your own rightness. So Balashov returns, and after the letter from Tsar Alexander is to say, hey, if you leave my territory, we don't have to fight. And Napoleon says, au contraire, in fact, we must, because you've started this war. So Andre at this time is trying to hunt down Anatoly. Most important thing to be doing. He's seriously going to the ends of the earth. He hears that Anatoly is in Turkey with the military, so he goes to find Kutuzov, and he gets a posting to go to Turkey. And he gets to Turkey and realizes that Anatoly has already gone home. And so he decides, okay, Anatoly, I think, has gone back to Moscow, but to go join the war in the East. And so he says, okay, well, I'm going to go join the war in the East. On the way there, he stops at Bald Hills again and finds that everything in the house is much worse. The house is now divided into two camps. His father, Madame Bourrienne, and their engineer Tikhon on one side, and his sister Maria, his son Nikolai, and some of the other servants on the other side. And he, after staying for a time, arguing with his father, telling him that Madame Bourrienne is kind of the cause of their problems, he realizes as like Maria is trying to convince him to forgive Anatoly. And he thinks like, no, I can't do this. These conditions of life had been the same before, but then they were all connected. Well, now they had tumbled to pieces. Only senseless things, lacking coherence, presented themselves one after another to Prince Andrew's mind. So, break
I
apart
like that
of this.
he's like, no, forgiveness is for women. And I'm a man. I don't forgive anybody.
Yeah.
It's good.
Especially, he doesn't forgive the man who convinced his child bride not to marry him in a sort of roundabout way.
Yeah, and then tried to kidnap her.
Yeah.
Which, all right.
All right. Speaking of, we're not done with that whole Natasha plot, hopefully.
No.
You might wish it's done, but it's not. So Andre reaches the front of the war by the end of June and finds that Anatoly has gone home and thinks, all right, well, I guess I'll stay here and fight. I've already traveled multiple countries to try to kill this man. So
Dude, being an aristocrat must have been kind of awesome, though.
You could just throw it on your whole life just to embark on a quest of revenge.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. So when he finds in this kind of camp, he realizes that pretty much most people here are opportunists, and the ones who aren't opportunists, the 8 or 9 camps he divides everyone up into, are either like so fundamentally opposed that they're really doing nothing helpful to advance the war effort, that it's just halting things, or they're opportunists who are just saying whatever's fashionable at that given time, which basically means nothing is happening. No one comes.
I forgot that there were like 9 camps, because I was reading this. I was like, oh yes, the 2 camps.
Yeah.
Into which people can be divided. And he just kind of keeps going and going and going.
I don't know if he set it up that way, because I had that exact same impression that I thought it was like, okay, the 2 camps, but he keeps going. And also, as a side note, he just starts laying down how like kind of insulting every given like group there.
Right.
At one point, it's a mishmash of people fighting the French, not only Imperial Russian nobility, but also some Prussians, Germans, Italians, Poles. I think a Czech general is in there. But at some point when they're discussing, Andre has this thought, or maybe it's the narrator. Because only Germans are self-confident enough on the basis of an abstract notion, science. That is, the supposed knowledge of absolute truth. A Frenchman is self-assured because he regards himself personally, both in mind and body, as irresistibly attractive to men and women. An Englishman is self-assured as being a citizen of the best organized state in the world, and therefore, as an Englishman, always knows what he should do, and knows all he does as an Englishman is undoubtedly correct. An Italian is self-assured because he is excitable, and easily forgets himself and other people. A Russian is self-assured because he knows nothing, and does not want to know anything, since he does not believe that anything can be known. So
I mean, I guess you would hate to be someone studying IR or political science. This chapter is like a real who's who of like problematic IR professors.
Truly, yeah. This is exactly like walking to an IR 101 class and hearing some this is on the same level for me as sitting down to talk to someone in an IR class and they bring up unprompted the Clash of Civilizations and start defending it. That's the exact same vibe to me.
I saw that book on Twitter as somebody who said it had dealt the most damage to IR as a discipline. And I think I tagged you on that one. I got a real kick out of it.
Yeah. Yep, that sounds about. I had a professor who she was the most tactful woman I've ever known. Like people would throw questions out of left field and she would like casually deflect. Like one time someone, I forget what the context was, asked something about like 9/11 and like kind of conspiratorially. And she was just was like, honestly, that's not something I know a lot about. Professor Olmsted actually teaches a class on American conspiracy theories. So you might be able to speak with her and she would probably have a deeper knowledge in that subject.
Yeah,
like such a casual
the professor
way.
actually did 9/11.
So she was like that tactful. When it came to the Clash of Civilizations, she brought it up and said, I'm only bringing it up because we have to bring it up because it has a place in IR history. However, I would like to emphasize that this is a completely ahistorical and ascientific view of a piece of work, essentially.
But is there really a piece of work that can be scientific, Cameron?
That's a question Tolstoy would like to pose. And certainly, as Tolstoy would have it, the Germans believe so.
Yes.
I think it's funny, like, as they're going through, obviously he's kind of insulting everybody, but it's like he's got like a good old fashioned like 1910s views of Italians in this one. Everyone else gets
I felt like he ran in the scene when he came to Italians, actually.
All the other ones he's like these really in-depth things. For the Italians, he's like, I don't know, Italians are dumb, whatever.
Yeah. It's like, all right.
Yeah. So Andre, he continues through the camp, he attends meetings, and he realizes as he's watching everyone that, as it said in the book, a thought had long since occurred and often occurred to him during his military activities, the idea that there is not and cannot be any science of war, and therefore there can be no such thing as military genius, now appeared to him an obvious truth. And he goes on to go on like a longer rant. This is a good part for longer rants, which I enjoy, but I won't read them all because that would take up the entire podcast. But he basically
they're also the same thing. I think I wrote one of these in my notes, and I was like, "Do you get it yet? Do you get it yet?"
Yeah, he does it with authorial skill. So every time I'm still into it.
Yeah.
But he goes on to say, like, can we really consider a man a genius? How can anyone really know that what we should be doing at any given time? Of course, there's so many factors this relies on: knowing troop strength, where is the enemy going to be, this and that. You cannot possibly know that. Really, the man doesn't need to be smart, creative, intelligent. You just need to be stoic and straightforward enough to ignore everything around you except the order in front of you and just carry that out. And that's considered military genius if you're lucky.
Well, and that's why he doesn't like most of the camps, because they think Napoleon's a genius when, as we saw from some of the earlier parts, it just happened to be that he could see through fog. It was just complete coincidence and happenstance. So he only likes this one German because this one German thinks that Napoleon's an idiot for not following his theory of war. But he agrees that, yes, Napoleon is an idiot, but he doesn't like the German because of, German stuff. And but he does agree that Napoleon is not a genius. And that's kind of, I think, what he's trying to kind of point and mock a little bit, or a lot of bit.
Yeah. So from there, Andre decides, I'm going to go join the military, or the army itself, which he loses standing forever because the Tsar asks him basically, hey, do you want to stay here with me? And he says, no, I'm good. Thanks, though.
I'm good. I want to go die over here.
Honestly, preferable to hearing you all talk. So from there, we go to Nikolai, who's now going back to the military after that whole thing that happened last time. And his parents are begging him to come back. He says no, but he writes to Sonia and says, look, my love, my cousin, I will return after this war, and this will be our last separation, and then we can finally get married. And this is 7 years on from the beginning of the book. So he's in his mid-20s now. He's been on and off an officer in a hussar regiment for the better part of a decade. So now he's sort of a senior. There are many young people who he recognizes as in the same position as himself 7 years ago, and he kind of has this same almost paternal relationship to them sometimes. And even begins to dislike many members of his regiment because he sees them as too boisterous or their tales too false. So he's becoming more discerning. And he goes out, and they begin to, after some carousing and meeting women, actually go out to fight. And now Nikolai no longer feels afraid approaching the battlefield. Remember, back in his first action, so to speak, he was literally so afraid that he couldn't even like duck under cannon fire. And now it's not that he's not afraid; it's just that he now knows how to organize his thoughts and still act with that fear. And it's changed so much that now when he hears there's fighting, he goes directly to the front to go see it happen, and watches a unit of Ulan, that's like a Prussian like cavalry, charge the French, and he's just sitting there and he's just kind of enjoying the scene. He sees an opening, and he goes up to an officer and says, "Hey, we could like exploit that and crush the French, these dragoons, also kind of a light cavalry." And the officer says, like, "Well, yeah, we probably could." And then Nikolai says, "Okay, perfect." And he rides off, and he like rallies the regiment, and he charges without really any order. And he's feeling brave and heroic, and he pulls out a saber, and he sees a French officer, and he leans in for that strike. And in that very moment, he feels like an incredible discomfort come over him as he sees the officer fall off his horse and get like caught up in his saddle. And it's noted as he goes into this that he acted as he did when hunting, without reflecting or considering, which keep the hunting thing in mind. And remember specifically how Nikolai did when he was hunting. So he, after he strikes the officer, something vague and confused, which he could not at all account for, had come over him with the capture of that the officer's captured, with the capture of that officer and blow he had dealt him. And even though everyone kind of claps him on the back for it, he feels a vague feeling, almost shameful about it. And he's just like, how could I do? Like, he just thinks, and he's even given a St. George's Cross, a high award, and later command of a battalion for that. But he's kind of like, how could I do that? How is he to blame? He's just like a guy like me. So he has his all quiet in the Western Front moment. And yeah, that he feels shame. He feels bad about the war. So going back to Moscow itself, Natasha at the end of the last part has fallen ill. Doctors try to cure her. We mentioned that Tolstoy goes in this part of really rant against doctors because it's apparent to the narrator that it's really not a real illness, but in fact, just sort of grief that has overcome her. That classic disease which only strikes women in like certain eras in books written by men.
I was going to say, like, the way
grief.
Yeah, the way he describes it, really. This one doesn't quite land.
She died of a broken heart. So, although I do like the point, I like the way that the doctor's presence is kind of a talisman for everyone. For the family, a talisman that they're doing something, and for Natasha, a talisman that rejecting what they have to do for her is a sign that she does not really value her own life, and kind of makes her feel better in a way. And from there, she starts through asking a friend's coming to Moscow and saying, "Hey, I'm here for religious service. Come with me to communion." Natasha goes with her, and she kind of has this sudden moment of realizing, I was bad, but with God, I can be good. And she gets really religious and feels suddenly that she can, anything is possible. Finally, I was vile, but finally I'm good. And, after like a week of this, she attends a sermon, and and she's praying up there. She feels really holy, and she's praying for her friends and her family, and she's praying for her enemies too. And she prays for everyone, under the auspices of God's vision. And then the priest is up at the front being like, "God, strike down the enemies of the imperial Russian state. We will crush them, and everyone will know that we are God's chosen people." And she's like, "Yeah, what? I mean, I think so. I mean, I think we're supposed to pray for enemies, but okay, sounds good. You're the priest." And so even with this kind of weird tension here, she begins to start feeling better and improving physically. At the same time, Pierre this year has been doing okay. He's kind of living the same life, but the thought of Natasha is like making him feel like life is worth living suddenly, kind of the same state as Andre. So that's coming back. And he, at this point, the war, fever is getting strong in Moscow, and there's worries about spies, and people are learning. Finally, the aristocracy are learning Russian because they're worried about being accused of being saboteurs or spies. And Pierre attends a dinner at the Rostovs, and he, at this time, has also, I should say, absolute unit alert. In the street, he had grown so stout this year that he would have been abnormal had he not been so tall, so broad of limb, and so strong that he carried his bulk with evident ease. So,
Unit.
Rakhmetov, look out.
Look out, baby.
So he attends a dinner, brings them a letter from the emperor, and at that point, like, Natasha, because she's doing better, he's like overcome with, oh my god, I'm too in love with a teenager, and decides to leave, and he can't go back. Oh, I want to actually circle back. Sorry, I'm gonna wrap up in just a second. I want to circle back to Natasha a second. When she's in church, it's mentioned that people are kind of talking about how attractive she is, and she knows she's attractive, but that's a terrible curse for her. It makes her condition worse. And I think it's funny that I don't know if this appears otherwise, but between Father Sergius and Natasha, I'm seeing it. We're almost at a pattern of characters being like, oh, I want to be good and cuddly, but I'm just so hot.
So hot. Yeah, I don't know what to do.
My biggest struggle in life is that I'm too hot. When I go to church, people just talk about how hot I am all the time. And I would say, I would attribute to him like that the bigger trend of male authors being like, oh, this woman is so attractive, but he does it for men and women. We know we have two examples here. Just people being too hot to be in church and needing to become anchorites to get away from the evil claws of other people who think they're attractive. At the same time, as Pierre is deciding, I have to leave and I could never come back, Petya, the youngest child of the Rostovs, now 15, decides he needs to join the Hussars like his brother. And his father says to him, no. What? No. And his exact words are, which is very funny to me, he kind of yells at him and says, the milk of your mother is not yet dry on your lips. You cannot basically go and fight.
I didn't like that.
You didn't like that? I thought it's like an old fashioned, the phrase, like the insult, I've never heard this in years, but like when you're a teenager, you like hear the teenagers like, oh, have your balls dropped yet? Which always kind of grossed me out. And this one is still gross, but like slightly less gross.
Is it? I don't know. I was like uncomfortable.
It's uncomfortable because, if someone said that to me, I would be like, all right, that's a little weird. Mostly because I'm 25 and filing my taxes as an independent for like the last 7 years. But all right, yeah, fair enough. So, Petya,
yeah, he does dunk on Petya pretty good.
He does. It's a good dunk. But Petya is so dedicated to this idea that he wants to go see the Tsar when he approaches, and he's almost crushed in a crowd. And his father's like, oh, Jesus, okay, fine. If you're going to go to that extreme, I'll find a not dangerous posting for you. And then finally we end on the Tsar coming to the nobility and asking them for a tribute of soldiers, quote unquote, peasants, conscripted. And there's a whole big debate, which Pierre tries to get into, and Pierre gets dunked on when he tries to engage in debate before finally the Tsar shows up, and everyone, regardless of what they were debating for, jumps up and says, yeah, whatever you want, sir. 10,000 troops? Sure. And Pierre's like, yeah, I'll raise 1,000. They're trying to outdo each other. And Pierre was like, his initial point was, we need to ask about what he needs to figure out what we can smartly give. And he comes in, he's just like, a whole regiment. What do you need? So that's
to be fair, I don't know if anyone in the book is actually richer than Pierre. So hey,
that's true. He could very easily do that.
Yeah.
And this is where we end part 1 of book 3.
Oh yeah.
Boy, there's a lot. I think we've gone over a good amount of it as we've been going. But is there anywhere you want to start or anything you wanted to cover to kick off?
Yeah, I can think of a few things that I think would be good to talk about.
Yeah.
Let's see here. I was thinking a little bit about ritual this time through. Ritual between war and the ritual of medicine, which you kind of pointed to already, which I thought was good. The sort of thing that Nikolai does when he's talking amongst his regiment and people are telling stories, and he has, like he said, this sort of mature reflection of knowing that these stories are all fake, but they serve this role of kind of glorifying the country and the Tsar, and so he has to kind of partake in them, or at least not be grumpy about it, not tell people that they're lying, that this is a fake thing. It sort of is just this military ritual, I guess, is how I started to think about it. It's not something that anyone intentionally tries to do, but it's something that they all do kind of regardless of intention, and they're all kind of part of that sort of life. And so that was an interesting thought to me, in the same way that the ritual of medicine, right, like you mentioned, is kind of there not to actually cure anybody, but to make everyone around that person sort of feel better and feel like they sort of have a place in the course of something that can't really be altered. I would probably disagree with the idea that of that, especially with modern medicine. I think that Tolstoy kind of loses his thread on the medicine when he tries to link it to his kind of overall world theory of like people are so different and there's so many nuances that medicine as a science can never really do anything. And like you said, for the time he's writing, that maybe is true, probably is true. I think that medicine has definitely given us good things. I would like to keep receiving medicine. If any doctors
Sure.
are listening, thank you for medicine. Um, I do think that he might be onto something in the way that you could argue there is sort of an over reliance on like medicine and
Hmm.
medication, and there are like kind of maybe other things that we could look to address to sort of fix or improve
Hmm.
health. And so like maybe you could make that sort of argument in the line of Tolstoy's thinking. I think there is an argument to be made for that, but I would probably say just his kind of like distaste of medicine and kind of distrust of doctors
Sure.
is not rooted in that same exact thinking.
Yeah. I mean, I'll go so far to defend his point as is. I think this is around the same time, maybe a little before, maybe a little after, when becoming a surgeon was like a superstar thing to do. And so it's just
Right.
like a funny thing that they did, like, oh, come watch the surgeon do surgery. He can do it real fast,
You
which
can
is
do
what
it real
ended up.
fast and like 3 in 10 people survive. Mhm.
So, I mean, if that's your point of reference, okay.
Yeah.
I don't know, no evidence that I don't know if you've ever, there's this one, I'll put it in the show notes, story around this era of like some surgeon who was like reportedly like, oh, I'm the fastest surgeon. And one time he went so fast that his surgery had a 300% fatality rate when he
I did
not
see
only he
this.
cut off, he
Yes.
cut off his assistant's fingers when
Yes.
they were in the person started bleeding out, his assistant started bleeding out, and someone in the crowd died of shock. And obviously the patient and the assistant both died. So
And
like,
Tolstoy was actually in the audience, and he said, "I told you not to trust the Germans." And he spat on the ground and he walked out. Yeah, he did do that.
yeah, so I'll defend the point insofar as, yeah, okay. So at the time, there was some dodgy stuff. I think it is specifically mentioned that she's like assigned like sleeping in chicken cutlets. So, and some like mysterious pills. So, all right, for a certain point of view at a certain time, fair enough. However, it kind of loses itself in light of
Yeah,
developments.
but I think that's an okay prescription, at least for me. A lot of the times
Sure,
when I don't feel right, got a
chicken and
migraine.
yeah,
Fortunately, I don't have any serious illnesses at the moment, but I think most of it could be solved for me by like taking a nap and eating a chicken cutlet. That would be
sure.
pretty good
I did
with my
almost sleep
dog.
off strep throat once, so maybe there's. I was asleep for almost 4 straight days, but
Yeah, yeah.
so I don't. Yeah, no, I don't think anyone. People, I just like disappeared for 4 days, and people, I came back and like, hey, what happened? I was like, oh, I had strep. I got a doctor's appointment like 4 days in. They're like, yeah, you got strep throat here. Like, it's almost gone though. So, and then everyone's like, wait, you just slept for like you have like, what'd you eat? I was like, well, after day 3, I pulled myself out of bed to get some soup. They're like, Jesus Christ, please tell me next time you're sick. The weird thing is, I didn't live alone. I had like 6 roommates. In fact, I had 6 housemates and one person I lived in a room with, and I don't think that ever came up. Anyway,
That's good.
beside the
That's
point.
good.
So,
Yes. I kind of think though, like he points to this thing that exists between humans of it's like this fundamental goodness that exists. You want to help even though you know there's nothing that you can really do. So we've constructed something to make us feel involved in the process.
yeah,
And I'm I don't know, I'm sure there are plenty of examples of this today. I mean, it was just an interesting way to kind of like conceptualize of that system. So I found that fascinating, even though as I mentioned, I like medicine. You can put me on the record for that. I have taken medicine before.
Official Tipsy Tolstoy line on medicine is that we like medicine. Please
Yes, we have developed
don't
some
stop.
stances here. We like medicine, and we
Yeah.
are against child marriages. So pretty
Yes.
strong stances.
Pretty strong, pretty
that we've
controversial
taken.
ones. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Next time I get strep
Mm-hmm.
throat, please give me antibiotics if it's medically necessary, if my doctor's listening to this.
Yep. Yep.
So, okay. From there, do you mind if we talk about war for a little bit? I know we talked a little bit about the ritual.
Yeah.
There's not like a
Yeah,
whole
we can
lot to
talk
say. We kind of went over a lot of Tolstoy's kind of just hammering home pretty obvious points. I think the most subtle one is his theory of history, which he lays out in exacting detail. So the narrator pretty much says what Tolstoy means in that regard. The only thing I can think is interesting really is, besides, I mean, to your point of the ritual, parallels between the doctors and the tales of soldiers. When Nikolai actually fights the French for the first time, and I know he's fought once before when he comes across like a French soldier in that misty battleground in which he just throws his gun and runs. So this is maybe not the first time he's actually fought, but the first time the text actually gives him a violent action.
Mm-hmm.
And as it said, the moment that the bullet lands, all his animation vanishes, and the officer falls, and his eyes screwed up with fear, as if in every moment expecting another blow, gazed up at Rostov with shrinking terror. His pale and mud-stained face, fair and young, with a dimple in the chin and light blue eyes, was not an enemy's face at all, suited to a battlefield, but a most ordinary one. So, I mean, this isn't an especially deep point. You read any given book on war, it's like, yeah, this is the point. We're all basically brethren. Why are we fighting each other?
I mean, I've been thinking a little bit too, like in terms of life and fate and just kind of propaganda in general, right? Like the like single biggest element of war propaganda is dehumanizing the other. And so what Tolstoy does in here is he rehumanizes war. And when Nikolai sees the humanity on his enemy's face, there's just this sort of sudden realization that kind of washes over him that this is so completely wrong. But why why does he do it? I don't know.
I mean, when I was reading this, what I wanted to bring in is there's an author I like a lot, Tim O'Brien, and for some people here, if you're into American high school, one of his books might have been an assigned reading for you. The Things They Carried. I don't know if have you ever read that?
No, funny story. I bought that book once. It sat in my locker all year because at the sort of orientation, here's what you need to buy for this year, I misread the board and thought this was for my English class when in fact it was for a different one. So that book stayed in my locker all year because I didn't realize it until the end of the year. And I had so much anxiety in high school. I thought like, well, what if I need this book? When's the teacher going to talk about this book? It was on the board. And so the things I carried were that book in my locker the whole year.
Yeah, fair enough. Very true to the first chapter of The Things They Carried.
I'm sure.
Which, by the way, if you ever read Tim O'Brien, Things They Carried, it's a good book. There's a reason why it's chosen for high schools. However, I would recommend you instead read July, and then maybe In the Lake of the Woods, which I think is his best book, but I don't think other people agree with me about that. Anyway, so in one of the lines that's always stuck with me from The Things They Carried, and this is a chapter in which one soldier in Vietnam, that Tim O'Brien mostly writes about being an American soldier in Vietnam. There's a soldier who wishes he had deserted, but basically says, I wasn't brave enough to flee to Canada when I got my draft notice. And as he's kind of sitting in the jungle, he thinks men killed and died because they were embarrassed not to. They went to war not for glory or power, or not for any honorable reason, but simply to avoid the blush of dishonor. Men died because they were afraid of death from embarrassment. Essentially, that's a paraphrase, but and that's a little different here. They obviously, some of the nobility are actually going to war in War and Peace for glory and honor. However, I think as an underlying idea, and especially getting to Tolstoy's point about us individually not solely being responsible for ourselves, but also being kind of pushed on by the forces of history being everyone around us. Yeah, in a lot of ways, with the exception of Pierre, who does resist that embarrassment, a lot of them are going to this fight because It would be dishonorable not to. It would be, if I show fear, if I show that I'm insufficiently loyal, that's really embarrassing to me, and that's like a form of death as a young person in this society, or even as an older person in this society. You see it also too in like all these principled stands the nobility and our aristocrats have, and how we should deal with the conscription immediately fading away in the view of the czar walking in and no one wanting to be the one person asking the question of, do you actually need 10 men out of every 1,000 serfs I have, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the point that Tolstoy makes is, consciously man lives for himself, but unconsciously he serves as an instrument for the accomplishment of the historical social ends of mankind, which was sort of similar.
Yeah.
Sort of similar.
Yeah. So
talking about that kind of existing but unrecognizable force that propels everything forward.
the hand of the world historical clock, as I think he called it a few parts back.
Yeah.
So
good times.
Good times, warfare. I think that's all I really had to say about that.
I would be a deserter, I think.
Yeah. Well, I mean, given, generally, especially in this war, when you're, what are you fighting for?
You know what I don't get in this one? Like, is like, how do you not get lost?
They do constantly.
How far these people are like, I know they do, but like, I simply do not understand how you move this many people on foot across the country.
Sure.
Just
you lose a lot of them. I think you just bring enough and hope that by the time you get there,
I guess that is, I guess, kind of the way it goes.
Yeah.
Well, all right, you solved that for me. That's why you need 10 men out of every 1,000. That way, like, one has the chance of actually making it to where they're going.
Honestly, so much of this book is just various characters wandering around trying to figure out where they're supposed to go, and as part of war. Like that entire bit where I think I want to say it's Andre who is dispatched to go to wherever the new Prussian capital is, and like has to go to several towns along the way just to figure out where the hell that is at this point.
Yeah, that'd be me. But I think I get lost and I just would kind of stop. I kind of like peter out my momentum. Yeah.
All right, that's good enough for me. I think.
Yeah, I made it far enough.
To your point about sometimes developments in technology and in medicine, sometimes undercutting Tolstoy's points a bit. Specifically, he's talking about how can really we have this knowledge of warfare. He really is truly writing from a time when, if you wanted to deliver news, you'd send out a dude and be like, well, I think he'll get there. I hope he gets back. I'll find out in a couple weeks to a month. And now military technology is unmanned spy satellites, or unmanned aerial drones, spy satellites, radios, sonar. It's
it is, and it's gotten better.
It's not to say that it's not perfect, obviously.
Yeah, like there's obviously,
it still stands,
I guess, a little bit more predictability. There's like better knowledge, a higher level of knowledge, but a lot of war and political decisions still depend on individuals making some choice, and you're never like, no satellite's going to be able to help you predict, for the most part, what someone's going to decide to do in a sort of split-second decision. But
sure,
yeah, I'd be curious to know how he'd feel about satellite. Probably, interestingly.
I have no evidence for this, but I think Tolstoy would be like a big anti-nuclear proliferation guy. And I know exactly what a story he'd tell constantly. Maybe this is just an archetype, I know, but I think at some point during the Cold War, and I'll link this in the show notes with more details, there is like an American like sonar station or like some kind of like reconnaissance thing for specifically ICBMs. It like sees a missile launch from the Soviet Union, and they're panicking and they're trying to confirm that, and they're like really getting ready for a nuclear response because they think, oh, it's just happened, until at some point like someone double checking realizes like, oh wait, no, this isn't, that was a simulation that accidentally got activated, that never actually happened. And so I don't think it was actually that close to like nuclear Armageddon, but the specter of it was raised and the possibility was there that could have led to a response. And I know for a fact that Tolstoy would like be talking about that endlessly.
Yeah, he would be insufferable with that story.
Yeah,
he would. It sounds like it could have been written by him, honestly.
Yeah, honestly, any given near nuclear disaster during the Cold War could have been a parable by Tolstoy.
True.
Okay. Do you
I
mind?
must.
Oh yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, do you mind? I know we're kind of coming up on our hour here. Do you want to go to one of the funniest things I've read in this book,
Yes.
Pierre's numerology obsession?
Let's go.
Let's go. Do you mind if I read a quick
Please
passage?
do.
Okay.
Please do. I just got to the part in the book where there was like numbers and charts. I was like, yes, I forgot about this one.
Yeah. So at this point, Pierre has gotten very involved in numerology because it's very fashionable to number the French alphabet and assign each letter a number value. First 1 through 10, then in values of 10, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100, 200, so on. And it's very fashionable to say, hey, if you take that and add up the letters in Napoleon's name spelled a certain way, it spells 666, which, as we all know, is the number of the beast in the Book of Revelations. So it's signifying the end times. And Pierre gets really into this because it's a sign, it's some clarity, it's something that cuts through all the unknowns in his life. And so he starts trying to do this himself. And he wrote the words L'Empereur l'Alexandre, La Nation Russe, and added up their numbers. But the sums were either more or less than 666. Once when making such calculations, he wrote down his own name in French, Comte Pierre Bezukhov, but the sum of the numbers did not come out right. Then he changed the spelling, substituting a Z for the S and adding a day in the article lay, still without obtaining the desired result. Then it occurred to him, if the answer to the question were contained in his name, his nationality would also be given in the answer. So he wrote Larousse Bezukhov and added up the numbers and got 671. This was 5 too much, and the 5 was represented by the E, the very letter elided from the article lay before the word emperor. By omitting the E, though incorrectly, Pierre got the answer he sought. Larousse Bezukhov made 666. This discovery excited him. How or by what means he was connected with the great event foretold in the apocalypse, he did not know, but he did not doubt that connection for a moment. His love for Natasha, Antichrist Napoleon, the invasion, the comet 666, L'Empereur Napoleon, and Larousse Bezukhov, all of this had to mature and culminate to lift him out of that spellbound, petty sphere of Moscow habits in which he felt himself held captive and led him to a great achievement and happy success. A great happiness, excuse me.
Nailed it. Nailed it. Totally got it. Book done. Tolstoy is a numerologist. We're good.
We're good.
Yeah.
I think something I think about a long time ago, you sent me a post somewhere of someone trying to use War and Peace to make a point, and they're using the words of one of the Freemasons, and you're kind of like pulling your hair out, and you're like, please read further in the book and you'll understand Tolstoy is not actually saying this. He's trying to make fun of it. I think this is a good example of, I think the importance of reading a lot of Tolstoy if you want to understand Tolstoy, because once you have read enough Tolstoy and you're paying attention to the themes, it's really obvious when he's being serious, like at the beginning, and when he's like trying to make fun of someone. But if you don't necessarily if you haven't acquired that voice yet, you might not necessarily see when Tolstoy is trying to be, and it succeeds at being incredibly funny.
It's kind of like you have to acquire the sense for whose perspective he's occupying, and what parts of that perspective he himself shares, because those are really the valid ones.
Yeah, which makes it difficult because he like goes between his little authorial ghost jumps between different characters at different times.
Right. But this one is definitely a critique of, well, a lot of things. And it goes to our greater topic of the great man in history. And Pierre is trying to find this way, right, to make himself be connected to these historical events that he feels happening around him. But there's no way to do that. And it's just fiddling around with the numbers and the letters, and it's just an absolutely comical scene.
He's just creating a little made-up system. He didn't create it, but he takes a little made-up system, shuffles some things around, gets the answer he was hoping for.
Yeah.
Man,
and
solved
it's kind of like, I guess,
existentialism.
if he really wanted to be involved in these events, like he could just go to war. That would do it. I mean, there's no guarantee he's going to actually do anything there, but like at least a little bit closer.
A single person walking up to Pierre and saying God helps those who help themselves would absolutely destroy him.
Yes. Yes. But so I saw actually a lot of connection here between Pierre and Natasha, which will become important later, more so than now. Well, I mean, you're kind of starting to see it now, but there's something that connects them on a deeper level. And there's this like almost exactly the same thing that happens to Natasha in church is happening to Pierre with his numbers, which is that she's seeing this right kind of system of thought of morals being built up around her. And then just like one thing kind of strikes her, it's just off. And she's like,
Mm,
oh no, there goes my whole, it's all crashing down
right.
around me. And that sort of is partially the priest talking about destroying Russia's enemies, but it's also kind of has to do with her own everyday habits, because you'll notice in that chapter, it's mentioned by the narrator that she's scrutinizing the other women's dresses out of habit, just something that she can't help not doing. That's just right. Habits are important to Tolstoy. And so I think that's sort of like that baseline habit is what kind of like opens her up to write this critique already
Mm.
of this overall system. And so Pierre is going to have this similar thing happen to him in this book, which is going to be great. And this book has a lot in store for us. I think this is really setting up a lot. I will still say connecting threads that I can see having read the book, but at the moment, not my favorite part of the book. Funny,
Yeah.
but kind of like, it's going to be more impactful as we get through book 3. Like there's a lot of just like really good scenes and moments towards the end of it.
Right. Like many beginnings, it's strong.
Yeah.
I mean, I think this is some of my favorite writing I've read so far in War and Peace, and that's not to say that it's a high bar for my favorite writing. A lot of it's appeared in this part, but like you say, it is mostly in the service of setting up. He's teeing up for something he's going to hit down the line.
Yeah, I mean, he's kind of giving you his thesis really in the very first chapter of book 3. So he's going to kind of test that and let that kind of
Sure.
go. But the connection between Pierre and Natasha, just to clarify, right? They're both seeking this sort of higher meaning. And it's just really important to look at how characters search for that. That's like that's the gist of War and Peace. Like that's the important thing to really pay attention to. That's why he writes so many characters. Is you're supposed to compare them to each other and look at how that development goes.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll eventually arrive at something that resembles what Tolstoy thinks. And you might or might not agree with that. I don't know. Not here to tell you what to think. All the time.
Sometimes.
Just some of the time. Sometimes.
Sometimes
I am here to tell you what you think.
Sometimes they're very specific. Well, like if you're going to read Notes from Underground in absence of the context, then we might say, no, you should read it in its context. But other times, hey, we're just here to put out some thoughts, which maybe you connect with or don't.
Put out some thoughts. That's what I'm saying.
Just asking questions.
Just here to ask questions, really.
Like, where is Chris Hansen in all of this?
Right.
Why is Pierre, Andre, Denisov, why have none of them ever walked into the Rostov household and found a slightly older gentleman standing there asking them to take a seat?
So many questions.
Well, I think unless there's any last words you want to say, I think that was a good wrap up.
No, I'm out. I'm done.
Let's be out
Russian
here.
literature forever.
All right, it's been a good run, boys. Next episode, we're going to be discontinuing this series because we've finally solved it. Much like Wittgenstein solved philosophy forever, we've solved Russian literature forever, and we're going to be going on to our new passion. Hold on, let me pause to find a joke here.
Just like Fukuyama resolved all of history forever, we have resolved podcasting.
Sure. And on that point, we're going to be specifically going over to Political Theory podcast. So I hope you're ready to read The End of History by Francis Fukuyama next time, followed by, of course, by one of our favorite novels and articles, The Clash of Civilizations. So
it wouldn't be a good thing for me morally, I don't think, but I would love to just have a podcast which is just called like Things That I Hate. It's just like each episode is just something that really grinds my gears.
I think we should one day do what we do now, but for political text, because that would be the most incoherent podcast, because we would be covering like literally Clash of Civilizations probably next time to some like, all right, let's talk Gramsci. All right, let's jump back to
Oh,
this
yeah.
incomprehensible, very obscure Slavic philosopher. All right, let's go over to Lenin. Let's go back to Beauvoir. It would it would be completely
Yeah.
incomprehensible, and it would
It
be
would
beautiful.
be great. I would love to do that, especially not being an expert on like any except one of the names mentioned. That would be awesome.
Sure, yeah. No, if we covered Lenin, that's a very uncontroversial topic. I think people would really go
Sure.
along with it, and we wouldn't get any pushback or disagreement from people on our
No.
analysis. That's a very
No,
straightforward.
I mean, like, hardly anybody even knows who that is. So,
Yeah, exactly.
right.
All
right, I'm just going to cut us off.
Yeah.
Before we let you go, we want to extend a sincere thank you to all of our current patrons. We've got Jeff, Madeline, Ann, Janice, Daniel, Darren, Daniel, Paige, Jesse, Lou, Irini, Brandon, Allison, Cole, Elise, Mysterious, Donor Dude, Joanne, Yitza, Alex, Stephanie, Eli, Caitlin, Brett, Isaac, Austin, Zachary, Pack Rob, Maya, Amanda, Blake, Shannon, Elizabeth, James, Ben, Khalil, Natalie, John, Amanda, Yulia, M. Nikolaevna, Danielle, Banana Karenina, and JG. Podcasting isn't free and grad school doesn't pay very well, so if you're interested in joining with our current patrons to keep the show running, take a look at our Patreon at patreon.com/tipsytolstoy. The music used in this episode was Soviet March by Toasted Tomatoes. You can find more of their stuff on toastedtomatoes.bandcamp.com and also on YouTube under the same username. If you're looking for other places to find us, you can also follow us on Instagram at Tipsy Tolstoy Podcast or join our email list on our website, tipsytolstoy.com. You'll hear from us again soon.